The bitter wind howled through the jagged peaks of Cathmore, carrying with it the promise of another brutal night. Marcus pulled his makeshift fur cloak tighter around his shoulders as he climbed the rocky path to his shelter, crude but effective cave dwelling he had carved and reinforced over the past 6 months since his transport ship had crashed on this unforgiving world. The shelter was hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines and carefully arranged stones, invisible to the predators that roamed these mountains. He had learned quickly that survival here meant staying hidden, staying quiet, and never letting his guard down. The native creatures of this world were unlike anything he had encountered in his years as a geological surveyor. Some hunted in packs with intelligence that seemed almost human, while others were solitary killers with claws that could slice through rock. As Marcus approached his cave, something felt wrong. The small pieces of thread he had carefully placed across the entrance were disturbed. His hand moved instinctively to the crude iron blade he had forged from salvaged metal, a weapon that had saved his life more times than he could count. He paused, listening to the wind and the distant calls of the blue-furred howlers that emerged at dusk. There, a soft scraping sound from within his shelter, barely audible above the mountain winds. Marcus crept closer, his leather boots silent on the stone. And GT clear his throat. And GT through a gap in the vine curtain he glimpsed movement inside his cave. A figure huddled near his small fire pit, where dying embers cast dancing shadows. On the rough walls, the intruder was small, wrapped in what appeared to be woven plant fibers that had seen better days. But even in the dim light, Marcus could see the telltale blue glow emanating from exposed skin. One of the natives, his grip tightened on his blade. In 6 months on this world, he had encountered the blue-skinned inhabitants only twice, and both times had nearly cost him his life. They were fierce, territorial, and possessed a strength that far exceeded their slender frames. "I know you were there." The figure spoke without turning around, the voice unmistakably female and carrying an accent that made the human words sound almost musical. "Your footsteps," they echoed differently than the stone cats. Marcus stepped through the curtain, blade raised but not threatening. "This is my home. You need to leave." The alien turned slowly, and he found himself looking into eyes that glowed with a soft phosphorescent blue, like twin stars in the darkness. Her skin bore the characteristic azure tint of her people, and despite her obvious exhaustion and hunger, there was a dignity in her bearing that gave him pause. "I am Lyra," she said, rising carefully, with her hands visible. "I do not come to fight. I am—" She searched for the word, desperate enough to break into a human shelter. Marcus replied, not lowering his weapon. "Your people killed my friend Jake when we first landed. Why should I trust you?" Lyra's eyes flickered with what might have been regret. "Some of my people fear yours. They think you bring death from the sky. But I have watched you these past days. You do not hunt for sport. You do not take more than you need. You show respect to the mountain spirits." "I don't believe in spirits," Marcus said, though he kept his voice neutral. "Just survival." "Same thing, perhaps," Lyra replied with a slight smile that revealed teeth slightly sharper than human normal. "I can cook. I know which plants heal and which kill. I can track the safe paths through the Crystal valleys were the ground. Serpents sleep. In exchange I ask only for warmth and shelter through the cold season. Marcus studied her face, looking for deception. The cold season on Kethmore lasted nearly 8 standard months, with temperatures that could kill an unprotected human in hours. If she was lying about her abilities, they would both be dead before the first major storm. And if I refuse, Linda's shoulder sagged slightly, then I will die. Tonight the sector patrol these peaks, and I cannot outrun them in my condition. She pulled back her makeshift cloak, revealing a partially healed wound along her ribs, the skin around it bearing an unhealthy pale blue tinge. Sector, my former companions, they believe I have betrayed our clan by learning your language, by watching your ways instead of simply killing you. Her voice hardened. They are not entirely wrong. Sukaram. The wind gusted outside and Marcus felt the temperature drop noticeably. Snow was coming. He could smell it in the air. The smart thing would be to drive her away, to maintain the isolation that had kept him alive this long. But looking at her wound, at the way she swayed slightly on her feet, he found himself thinking of all the times his own survival had depended on the kindness of strangers. You try anything, make any move that threatens me, and I'll gut you like a mountain crawler, he said, stepping aside. Understood. Linda nodded, relief evident in her posture. Understood. Over the following days, an uneasy partnership developed between them. Linda proved true to her word, demonstrating an intimate knowledge of the world that impressed even Marcus's hard-won survival instincts. She showed him which berries could supplement their meat diet without causing the violent illness he had suffered early in his stay. Her cooking transformed their simple meals into something that actually resembled food, using spices and preparation methods that brought out flavors he never knew existed. Most importantly, she taught him to read the signs that warned of dangerous weather, the subtle changes in wind direction and animal behavior that preceded the devastating storms that swept down from the high peaks. The rock birds flee to the deep caves when the death wind comes, she explained one morning as they watched a flock of the armored flying creatures streaming southward. We have perhaps 2 hours. True to her prediction, the storm clear's throat that followed was the worst Marcus had experienced, with winds that would have torn apart his previous shelter and hail the size of a man's fist. But forewarned, they were able to secure their home and wait it out in relative safety. How did you learn to speak my language? Marcus asked during the storm's lull as they shared a meal of roasted tuber roots and what Linda assured him was safe meat from one of the smaller local herbivores. Linda was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. My people, we are not all the same. Some cling to the old ways, fear all change, but others, like my grandfather, believe that understanding brings strength. He taught me that knowledge is survival, whether it comes from our ancestors or from strangers who fall from the sky. And the sector disagreed. Oscar leads them now. He was once a friend before the fear consumed him. He believes that learning from your people makes us weak, that it pollutes our pure way of life. Her hand unconsciously moved to the healing wound on her ribs. He made his position very clear. The storm raged for 3 days. When it finally passed, the world outside was transformed, covered in a blanket of blue-tinted snow that sparkled like scattered jewels in the sunlight, but with the beauty came new dangers. The cold was more intense than anything Marcus had experienced, and many of their usual food sources were now buried or had migrated to lower elevations. "We need to move," Linda said on the fourth morning, studying the landscape from their cave entrance. "The long freeze has begun. This shelter will not protect us when the real cold comes." "How much colder does it get?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Cold enough to freeze breath before it leaves your lungs. Cold enough to turn water to stone in moments." She turned to him with serious eyes. "There are deeper caves protected, places where my people have sheltered for generations, but reaching them means crossing sector territory." They spent the day preparing for the journey, gathering their few possessions and what food they could carry. Linda fashioned crude snowshoes from bent branches and plant fibers, while Marcus sharpened his blade and crafted a simple spear from a straight piece of hardwood. "This Oscar," he said as they worked. "How dangerous is he?" Linda's hands stilled on her weaving. Oscar was trained as a hunter from childhood. He can track a snow mouse across stone and kill a crystal bear with nothing but a bone knife. But more than that, he is smart, cunning. He will not simply attack, he will wait, plan, use our own desperation against us. Sounds like someone I'd rather avoid. Avoiding him is not possible if we wish to reach the winter caves. His patrols cover all the safe passages. She met his eyes. "But I know another way. Dangerous, but if we are careful." The path Linda led him along the next morning was treacherous beyond anything Marcus had imagined. They followed narrow ledges carved into sheer cliff faces, crossed ice bridges that groaned under their weight, and navigated through forests of crystal formations that sang in the wind like broken glass. The ancestors called this the Path of Echoes, Linda explained as they carefully picked their way between towering crystal spires. "Sound travels strangely here. One footstep can bring down an avalanche or carry a whisper for miles." As if to prove her point, a distant sound reached them, voices speaking in the rapid musical language of Linda's people. She froze, motioning for Marcus to do the same. "Sector," she whispered, "they have found our trail." The next few hours passed in tense silence as they tried to move quickly without making noise. The crystal forest was a maze of reflecting surfaces and acoustic tricks, making it impossible to tell where the voices were coming from or how close their pursuers might be. They were nearly through the crystal maze when disaster struck. Marcus's spear caught on a low-hanging formation, and when he tried to free it, the crystal shattered with a sound like breaking thunder. The echoes bounced between the formations, amplifying until the entire forest rang like a massive bell. "Run," Linda said, and they ran. Behind them, the voices of the sector rose in hunting calls that sent chills down Marcus's spine. Whatever words they were shouting, the tone was unmistakably hostile. The sound of pursuit grew closer as the hunters abandoned stealth for speed. They burst from the crystal forest onto a broad plateau covered in knee-deep snow. On the far side, Marcus could see what looked like the entrance to a cave system, partially hidden by overhanging rocks. But between them and safety lay several 100 yards of open ground with no cover. There, Linda pointed toward the caves. The sanctuary is just inside that entrance if we can reach it. If, Marcus muttered, looking back at the crystal forest where their pursuers would emerge at any moment, they plunged into the snow, high-stepping through drifts that sometimes reached their waists. The cold was brutal, seeping through their improvised clothing and stealing strength from their muscles. Behind them, the first of the sector hunters appeared at the forest edge. Marcus got his first clear look at their pursuers and felt his blood chill. There were 5 of them, all tall and lean, with the characteristic blue skin of Linda's people. But these carried an aura of barely contained violence. They wore armor made from what looked like the shells of massive insects, and each carried weapons that spoke of generations of refinement, curved blades that gleamed like ice, spears with barbed points, and bows carved from some dark wood. The leader, a figure taller than the rest with intricate scarification covering his visible skin, raised a hand and called out something in their language. Linda stumbled as if the words had physically struck her. "Oscar," she whispered. The scarred leader called out again, his voice carrying clearly across the snow. This time Linda responded, her own voice defiant despite their desperate situation. "What is he saying?" Marcus asked as they continued their struggling advance through the snow. "He offers terms. Return with him, face judgment for consorting with sky demons, and you will be allowed to live." Linda's voice was bitter. "He calls you corrupted, says that my association with you has poisoned my spirit, and your answer," Linda shouted back a phrase that even in an alien language was clearly unprintable. The sector leader's response was immediate. He knocked an arrow and drew his bow down. Marcus tackled Linda into the snow just as the arrow whistled overhead. Projectile buried itself in a snow bank 20 yards ahead, its obsidian point gleaming. More arrows followed as they rolled and scrambled through the snow, trying to present a moving target while still making progress toward the caves. One shaft passed close enough to Marcus's head that he felt the fletching brush his ear. They were still 50 yards from the cave entrance when Oscar and his hunters began crossing the plateau. Moving with practiced efficiency, they spread out in a hunting formation that would cut off any attempt to chain direction. Their movement through the snow was far more graceful than Marcus and Linda's desperate floundering. "The cave," Marcus gasped, lungs burning from the cold air. "Will they follow us inside?" "Not into the sanctuary itself," Linda replied, breathing hard. "It is sacred ground, protected by ancient laws. But they can wait outside. We would starve before they give up." An arrow struck the ground inches from Marcus's foot, and he realized they weren't going to make it. The hunters were gaining ground rapidly, and their archery was becoming more accurate as the range closed. "Linda," he said, making a decision he hoped he wouldn't regret, "when I say run, head straight for the cave. Don't look back." "What are you?" "Run." And GT, clear his throat. And GT, instead of continuing toward the cave. Marcus suddenly changed direction, angling toward the nearest of the hunters. The unexpected move caught the sector off guard, and for a moment their formation wavered as they tried to adjust to his new course. Marcus had his crude iron blade in one hand and a chunk of ice in the other. He was no warrior, but 6 months of Surviving on this world had taught him that sometimes the best defense was sheer unpredictability. The hunter he was charging, a lean figure with geometric tattoos covering his arms, raised his spear and braced for impact. What he didn't expect was for Marcus to slide at the last second, using the slick snow to carry himself under the spear point and into the hunter's legs. They went down in a tangle of limbs and weapons. The hunter was stronger and more skilled, but Marcus had desperation and the advantage of surprise. His blade found a gap in the insect shell armor, and the hunter screamed, blue blood staining the snow. But even as Marcus struggled with his opponent, he could see the other hunters converging on his position. Linda was almost to the cave entrance, but she had stopped and was looking back with horror. "Go," he shouted just as a spear point punched through his shoulder. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus felt his grip on his blade weaken as fire spread down his arm. The wounded hunter beneath him took advantage of his distraction, rolling away and scrambling to his feet. Now 3 sector hunters stood over Marcus, weapons pointed at his throat and chest. The one he had wounded was holding his side, blue blood seeping between his fingers, but his eyes burned with fury. Oscar approached slowly, his bow still nocked but not drawn. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding stone. Linda called out from the cave entrance, her voice carrying a note of pleading. Oscar responded without taking his eyes off Marcus, and whatever he said made Linda's shoulders slump in defeat. "He says you have proven yourself a worthy enemy," Linda translated, her voice carrying across the snow. "You have shown honor in protecting me. For this he will grant you a clean death." "How generous," Marcus muttered, pressing his free hand to his wounded shoulder. But Linda wasn't finished. Translating, "He also says that if I return willingly, he will make your death quick instead of slow. He considers this mercy." And GT snorts. And GT, "Tell him," Marcus said loudly enough for his voice to carry, "that he can take his mercy." And his words were cut off as one of the hunters struck him across the face with the butt of a spear. Stars exploded across his vision, and he tasted blood through the ringing in his ears. He heard Linda and Oscar engaged in a heated conversation. Her voice grew increasingly desperate while his remained cold and implacable. Finally, she called out something that made all the hunters look toward the cave entrance. Oscar's scarred face twisted in what might have been amusement, and he replied with a single word that seemed to hit Linda like a physical blow. "What did you tell him?" And GT clears throat. And GT, Marcus asked, spitting blood into the snow. Linda's voice was barely audible. "I offered to take your place, to accept judgment for both our crimes, if he would let you go." She paused. He said no. The hunter who had struck Marcus raised his spear for a killing blow, but Oscar barked a command that made him hesitate. The scarred leader approached, studying Marcus with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. When Oscar spoke again, it was in heavily accented but understandable human words. "You fight for her." "Why?" Marcus met the alien's glowing eyes, tasting blood and defiance in equal measure. "Because leaving someone to die when you could help them isn't survival. It's just giving up on being human." Oscar tilted his head as if considering this answer. Then he said something to his hunters. That made them step back slightly. Interesting, the sector leader mused. Linda has told me that humans value individual life above the good of the tribe. I expected weakness, but you show something else. Disappointed. Curious. Oscar looked toward Linda, who stood frozen at the cave entrance. She has broken our laws, learned forbidden knowledge, betrayed the purity of our ways. By our custom she must die, but you— He gestured at the wounded hunter who was still bleeding steadily. You have proven yourself in combat, shown courage in hopeless circumstances. This matters. Marcus didn't like where this was going. What are you getting at? A test, Oscar said, his voice carrying the weight of ritual, single combat. You against me, weapons of choice, no interference. If you win, you both go free. If I win— He shrugged. That's not exactly fair odds, Marcus pointed out, struggling to his feet. His shoulder was on fire, and he could feel blood soaking through his crude bandages. Fair? Oscar seemed genuinely puzzled by the concept. Survival is not fair, human. It simply is. Marcus number. Linda's voice carried a note of desperation. Oscar has never lost single combat. He has killed crystal bears with his bare hands. Doesn't sound like I have much choice, Marcus replied, looking around at the hunters who still had weapons trained on him. Unless clears throat, you're planning to just execute me anyway. Oscar followed his gaze and nodded slowly. You understand. Good. Perhaps Linda chose her companion more wisely than I thought. The sector leader walked to where his hunters had laid down their gear and selected a curved blade similar to a machete. He tested its balance with a few practice swings that made the air whistle. Choose your weapon, he said, gesturing toward the pile of gear. Marcus looked over the collection of alien weapons, all clearly crafted by masters of their art. His own crude iron blade seemed pathetic by comparison, but familiarity counted for something in a fight, and he had learned to trust the weapon that had kept him alive this long. I'll stick with what I have, he said, drawing his blade despite the pain in his shoulder. Oscar's scarred face showed what might have been approval. Honor and simplicity. I respect this. The other hunters formed a loose circle around them while Linda watched from the cave entrance with obvious anguish. The snow continued to fall, dusting their shoulders and making the footing treacherous. Traditional rules, Oscar announced, speaking for the benefit of both his hunters and Linda. First blood has been drawn. He gestured at Marcus's wounded shoulder. Combat continues until death or surrender. No weapons but blades, no assistance from allies. And if I somehow win, and GT clears throat, and GT, then the spirits have spoken and your cause is just. Oscar raised his blade in what was clearly a formal salute. Though I do not expect this outcome. We'll see, Marcus said, returning the salute with his own crude weapon. They began to circle each other, feet crunching in the snow. Oscar moved with fluid grace, his blade held in a guard position that spoke of decades of training. His eyes never left Marcus's face, reading every micro-expression for hints of his opponent's intentions. Marcus, by contrast, felt clumsy and off balance. His shoulders screamed with every movement, and the cold was making his muscles stiff. But he had one advantage that the alien warrior might not expect: 6 months of desperate improvised fighting against creatures that didn't follow any rules of honorable combat. Oscar struck first, a lightning-fast thrust aimed at Marcus's chest. The human barely managed to deflect it, his blade ringing against the superior alien steel. The force of the impact sent jolts of pain through his wounded shoulder, and he stumbled backward. The sector leader followed up immediately, launching a series of precisely controlled attacks that forced Marcus to give ground steadily. Each parry was increasingly desperate, and he could feel his strength ebbing with his blood. "You fight well for an untrained sky demon," Oscar said conversationally as his blade sliced through the air where Marcus's head had been a moment before. "But courage alone will not save you." Instead of responding, Marcus grabbed a handful of snow and flung it at Oscar's face. The alien warrior was too experienced to be truly caught off guard, but the unexpected tactic bought Marcus a crucial second to launch his own attack. His blade caught Oscar across the ribs, drawing a line of blue blood through the ceremonial scarification. The cut was shallow, but it proved that the human could reach him. Oscar touched the wound and examined the blood on his fingers with what looked like genuine surprise. "Clever. Perhaps Linda has taught you more than language." "Haven't even gotten started," Marcus lied, breathing hard, but Oscar was no longer treating him like an amateur. The alien's next attack was a whirlwind of steel that nearly overwhelmed Marcus's defenses entirely. Only a desperate dive to the side saved him from having his throat opened, and he rolled through the snow to avoid the follow-up strike. As he came to his feet, Marcus realized he was now fighting with his back to a steep drop-off that fell away into a canyon filled with jagged rocks. Oscar had maneuvered him here, deliberately cutting off his retreat. "Nowhere to run, human. Face your death with dignity." Instead of retreating further, Marcus did something that went against every instinct. He charged directly at Oscar, accepting a shallow cut across his ribs in exchange for getting inside the alien's guard. They grappled for a moment, and Marcus discovered that Oscar was every bit as strong as Linda had warned. The alien's free hand closed around Marcus's throat, and stars began to dance across his vision as his air supply was cut off. But being shorter than his opponent had its advantages. Marcus drove his knee up with all his remaining strength, catching Oscar in the solar plexus. The alien doubled over with a grunt of pain, his grip loosening just enough for Marcus to break free. Both fighters staggered apart, breathing hard. Oscar's ceremonial scars were now crossed with several lines of bleeding guts, while Marcus felt like he was bleeding from a dozen different wounds. The snow around them was stained blue and red, and steam rose from the hot blood in the cold air. "You surprise me," Oscar admitted, wiping blood from a cut near his eye. "I expected you to die quickly like the other sky demons we have killed, but you adapt, improvise. These are valuable traits, valuable enough to let us go." Oscar's laugh was like breaking glass. "No, but valuable enough that I will remember you with respect as I kill you." The final exchange was brief and vicious. Oscar came in with a complex pattern of strikes that should have ended the fight immediately. But Marcus had been watching, learning, and he had noticed that the alien Warrior's footwork was slightly less sure on the slippery snow. Instead of trying to match Oscar's technique, Marcus threw himself forward in a tackle that carried both fighters toward the cliff edge. They hit the ground hard, rolling and struggling for advantages. Their blades were knocked away. For a moment they teetered on the very edge of the precipice, both men straining to avoid the fatal drop. Oscar's superior strength began to tell, and Marcus felt himself being forced backward. Then Linda's voice cut through the sound of their struggle, calling out something in her own language. The words seemed to freeze Oscar in place, his eyes widening with what looked like shock. Marcus didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around Oscar's waist and threw himself backward off the cliff, carrying the alien warrior with him. They fell through space for what felt like an eternity, bouncing off the rocky walls of the canyon. Marcus's last coherent thought before hitting the bottom was wondering if Linda would be able to survive the winter alone. He woke to find himself lying on a bed of soft furs in a warm cave lit by a crackling fire. His entire body was a map of pain, but Clear's throat, he was alive, which seemed impossible given his last clear memory. "You are awake," Linda's voice came from somewhere to his left. "I was beginning to worry." Marcus tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. How am I not dead? The snow at the bottom of the canyon was very deep, and Oscar, he cushioned your fall. Linda moved into his field of vision, her face grave. "He did not survive." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. "I know he was your friend once." Linda was quiet for a long moment. "When I called out to him at the end, it was something he taught me when we were children, a phrase about honor being more important than victory. I think it reminded him of who he used to be before the fear consumed him." "Where are we?" "The sanctuary caves. The other hunters carried you here after they retrieved your body from the canyon. By their laws, you had defeated their leader in fair combat. Even though you both died doing it, they were honor-bound to respect the outcome." Marcus absorbed this information slowly. "And now they have returned to tell the clans what happened here. That a sky demon fought with honor to protect one of our people, and that perhaps the old fears are not always wise." Linda moved closer, and he could see that she had been crying. Her phosphorescent tears had left glowing tracks down her cheeks. "Some will listen, others will not, but change has begun." Over the following weeks, as Marcus recovered from his injuries, other members of Linda's people began to visit the sanctuary. Most came out of curiosity, wanting to see the human who had defeated Oscar in single combat, but some came seeking knowledge, wanting to learn about the strange ways of the sky demons. Linda served as translator and cultural bridge, helping both sides overcome centuries of mutual fear and suspicion. She taught Marcus more of her language while showing her people that humans were not the monsters their legends claimed. "Your friend Jake," she said one evening, as they watched Clear's throat, the alien aurora paint the sky in shades of blue and green. "Tell me about him." Marcus was quiet for a while, remembering he was a geologist like me. Brilliant scientist, terrible at practical things, could analyze the mineral composition of a rock sample with his eyes closed, but couldn't start a fire to save his life. He smiled sadly. He probably would have loved this place if he'd had the chance to study it properly. The ones who killed him, they acted from fear. Fear of change, fear of losing what they thought made them pure. Linda's voice was thoughtful. Oscar was the same in the end. Fear made him cruel. What about you? What do you fear? Linda considered the question seriously. I fear that my people will choose fear over wisdom, that they will see cooperation as corruption and strength as weakness. I fear that this chance for understanding will be lost. As the months passed, Marcus learned that Linda's fears were not unfounded. The clans were divided in their response to the events at the sanctuary. Some, particularly the younger generation, embraced the possibility of learning from the human knowledge that had fallen from the sky. They were fascinated by concepts like metallurgy, engineering, and scientific method that could improve their harsh lives, but others, led by traditional elders, saw any contact with human ways as dangerous contamination. They began to speak of the need to purify the clans, to drive out those who had been corrupted by alien influence. The conflict came to a head when a delegation of elders arrived at the sanctuary demanding that Linda be turned over for judgment. Their leader was an ancient female named Cassandra, whose authority was absolute in matters of clan law. You harbor a traitor, Cassandra announced in accented human words, her voice carrying the weight of generations. One who has abandoned the pure ways of our ancestors for the poison wisdom of sky demons. Linda has broken no law that matters, Marcus replied, standing despite his still healing wounds. She chose to learn instead of remaining ignorant. How is knowledge a crime? Cassandra's glowing eyes fixed on him with undisguised contempt. Knowledge without wisdom is destruction. Human, your people fell from the sky in vessels of metal and fire. You bring ways that will change us into something we are not meant to be. Change isn't always bad, Marcus argued. Sometimes it's survival. Survival without honor is merely existence, the elder replied. We would rather remain true to ourselves and perish than become corrupted imitations of others. The debate might have continued indefinitely, but it was interrupted by the arrival of unexpected visitors. A group of young warriors burst into the sanctuary, their faces flushed with exertion and fear. Their leader, a female barely out of adolescence, spoke rapidly to Linda, their own language. As the report continued, Linda's expression grew increasingly grave. What is it? Marcus asked. The northern clans, Linda translated. They have allied with the metal hunters from beyond the ice walls. They plan to attack any clan that has shown sympathy for human ways. Cassandra's scarred features hardened. Metal hunters, you are certain? The young warrior nodded emphatically and continued her report. Even without understanding the words, Marcus could hear the fear in her voice. The metal hunters are not of our world, Linda explained for Marcus's benefit. They come from the cold void between worlds, seeking metals and slaves. In the past, all clans united to drive them away, but now the northern clans are using them as weapons against their own people. Cassara finished, her voice bitter with disgust. This is what comes of abandoning the old ways. Honor dies and only power remains. Despite her harsh words about human corruption, the ancient elder moved with surprising speed to address the crisis. Within hours, runners were dispatched to carry warnings to all the clans, while the sanctuary became a gathering point for warriors from across the region. Marcus found himself in the strained position of being both an outsider and a crucial participant in the coming conflict. His knowledge of human technology and tactics could be valuable in fighting the metal hunters, but many of the warriors were still suspicious of his presence. They fear that helping you will corrupt them, Linda explained, as they watched the camp spring up around the sanctuary, but they also know that desperate times call for desperate measures. The solution came from an unexpected source, a young warrior named Tyler, a name he had chosen for himself after learning human words from Linda, approached Marcus with a proposal. Teach us, Tyler said in heavily accented English, not your sky magic or metal fire, but your ways of thinking, how to see problems differently. What kind of problems? Marcus asked. Tyler led him to a crude map drawn in the sand showing the positions of various clan territories and the likely approach routes for the metal hunter army. Traditional tactics say we should meet them in the high pass where our knowledge of the terrain gives advantage, Tyler explained, but they have weapons that strike from great distance, armor that turns our blades. How does human thinking solve this? Marcus studied the map, his geological training helping him read the terrain features. You're thinking like prey, he said, finally, waiting for them to come to you, hoping your natural advantages will be enough. But what if you became the hunters instead? Over the next several days, Marcus worked with Tyler and a handful of other young warriors to develop new tactical approaches. Instead of meeting the metal hunters head-on, they would use guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks designed to disrupt supply lines and communications. Your people know this terrain better than anyone, Marcus explained as they planned their first raid. Use that knowledge, force them to fight where they're weak instead of where they're strong. Shoes are knowing. The first test of their new tactics came when scouts reported a metal hunter advanced force moving through the crystal canyons. Traditional clan doctrine would have called for a frontal assault, relying on superior numbers and knowledge of the terrain. Instead, Tyler's mixed force of young warriors and carefully selected veterans used a series of coordinated ambushes to devastate the enemy force without ever engaging in direct combat. They struck from hidden positions, used avalanches and rock slides as weapons, and melted away before the metal hunters could organize a response. The victory was decisive, but more importantly, it proved that human tactical thinking could be adapted to enhance rather than replace traditional clan methods. You see, Linda said to Kasara as they watched the victorious warriors return. Knowledge shared is strength, multiplied, not corruption. The ancient elder was silent for a long moment, studying the faces of the young warriors who had achieved what conventional wisdom said was impossible. Perhaps, she said finally, but wisdom is knowing when to embrace change and when to resist it. The test is not yet complete. The final test came sooner than anyone expected. The main metal hunter army, enraged by the loss of their advanced force, abandoned stealth and launched a direct assault on the sanctuary itself. Their goal was simple: capture or kill the human whose knowledge was proving so disruptive to their plans. The battle that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The Metal Hunters wore powered armor that turned most clan weapons into toys, and their energy weapons could punch through stone walls. But the defenders had advantages of their own: intimate knowledge of the cave system, weapons designed for close quarters, fighting and tactics that their enemies couldn't predict. Marcus found himself fighting alongside warriors who had initially viewed him with suspicion. His crude iron blade clashing against weapons that belonged in a science fiction novel. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had survived the crash of an advanced spacecraft only to find himself in a medieval-style battle for survival. The turning point came when Linda led a desperate assault on the Metal Hunters' command position using knowledge she had gained from watching human technology. She was able to identify and target the power source that fed their advanced weapons, the blue fire that powers their weapons. She shouted over the din of battle. It flows through the metal veins in their armor. Cut the veins, kill the fire. The information spread through the defending forces like wildfire. Warriors who had been futilely hammering at impenetrable armor began targeting joints and connections instead. The Metal Hunters' technological advantage began to crumble as their equipment failed under precisely targeted attacks. In the end, the battle was won not by superior technology or numbers, but by the very thing Kasara had warned against: the mixing of different ways of thinking, human analytical methods, combined with clan knowledge of metallurgy and engineering, produced solutions that neither side could have developed alone. As the Metal Hunter survivors retreated into the wasteland beyond the ice walls, Marcus found himself surrounded by warriors who no longer looked at him with suspicion. He had proven himself, not just in single combat, but as an ally whose different perspective made them all stronger. "What happens now?" he asked Linda as they watched the enemy forces disappear into the distance. "Now we rebuild," she replied. "Some clans will return to the old ways, pretending this never happened, but others will remember what we accomplished here. They will teach their children that strength comes not from purity, but from wisdom wherever it is found." Aver Kasara approached them as they spoke, her ancient features thoughtful. "You have taught us something valuable, Sky Demon," she said to Marcus, "that survival sometimes requires us to become more than we were, not less." "I learned as much as I taught," Marcus replied honestly. "Maybe more." The old elder nodded slowly. "This is how knowledge should work. Each side gives, each side receives. Both become stronger." She turned to Linda. "You chose your companion well, young one. He has honor." In the weeks that followed, as the clans rebuilt and prepared for the harsh winter ahead, Marcus found his role. This alien society slowly evolving. He was no longer just a crash survivor, dependent on Linda's protection, but a valued member of the community, whose knowledge and perspective were actively sought. He taught young warriors about metallurgy and engineering, showing them how to improve their weapons and tools using principles he had learned in his previous life. In return, they taught him their ancient techniques for surviving in environments that would kill an unprepared human in hours. Linda became his partner in these exchanges, translating not just language but concepts that had no direct equivalent between the two cultures. Her role as a bridge between worlds was recognized formally when the clan councils named her speaker between peoples, a position that had not existed before but was clearly needed now. Do you miss your old life? She asked him one evening as they sat outside the sanctuary watching the stars emerge in the alien sky. Marcus considered the question. Seriously, I miss my friends, my family. I miss knowing that I could call for help if I needed it. He gestured at the landscape around them, harsh but beautiful in its own way. But I don't miss the loneliness. I spent most of my time on Earth alone, in remote places studying rocks. Here, I'm part of something larger, and you do not wish to return to your people. Even if there was a way, I'm not sure I would take it, Marcus admitted. My whole life was about understanding dead things, minerals, geological formations, ancient history. Here I'm helping build something alive and growing. Linda smiled, her phosphorescent features beautiful in the starlight. Then you have found what my grandfather would call the greatest treasure, purpose that makes you larger than yourself. As the first snows of true winter began to fall, Marcus reflected on the path that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a lone survivor, clinging to life by his fingernails. Now, he was part of a community, a teacher and student both, helping to bridge the gap between two very different ways of understanding the world. The cold season would be hard, he knew. Resources were limited, the weather was brutal, and not all the clans had accepted the new alliance between human and native. Knowledge there would be more challenges, more conflicts, more opportunities for both triumph and tragedy. But for the first time since his ship had crashed on this harsh world, Marcus felt genuinely optimistic about the future. He had learned that survival was about more than just staying alive. It was about finding ways to grow and adapt, to become stronger by embracing change rather than fearing it. As Linda moved closer to share warmth against the cold, Marcus looked up at the alien stars and smiled. He was home. The winter storms came early that year, bringing with them challenges that tested every lesson Marcus and Linda had learned about cooperation and survival. The sanctuary caves, designed to shelter a few dozen people, were now home to nearly 300 refugees from the conflicts that had torn the clans apart. Food was scarce, tempers were short, and the careful alliances they had built threatened to crumble under the pressure of too many people competing for too few resources. We cannot continue like this, Tyler warned during one of their daily planning meetings. The hunters are bringing back less game each day, and the stored food will not last until spring. Marcus studied the crude charts they had drawn to track their supplies. What about the thermal vents you mentioned, the ones further down in the cave system? What about them? Linda asked. On Earth, thermal vents often support unique ecosystems, heat, minerals, sometimes edible organisms that don't depend on surface food chains. He looked up from the charts. It's worth investigating. The expedition to the deep thermal caves was dangerous. The passages were narrow and unstable. The air was thick with mineral vapors, and no one knew what they might encounter in the depths. But with winter tightening its grip on the surface world, they had little choice but to explore every option. What they found exceeded their wildest expectations. The thermal vents were indeed surrounded by life, strange creatures that had evolved to thrive in the hot, mineral-rich environment. Some were clearly edible, while others had properties that could be useful for medicine or tool making. More importantly, the heat from the vents could be channeled to create warm living spaces far more comfortable than the upper caves. With careful engineering, a combination of human physics knowledge and native understanding of stone working, they were able to redirect the thermal flow to create a livable environment for the entire refugee population. You see, Linda said to the assembled clan leaders as they toured the new living areas, different knowledge working together creates possibilities that neither could achieve alone. Not everyone was convinced. A faction of traditionalists, led by a warrior named Brooks, who had lost family in the metal hunter attacks, argued that the changes were happening too fast and going too far. We are losing ourselves, Brooks declared during a heated council meeting. Our children learn Sky Demon words instead of the old songs. Our young warriors practice alien fighting methods instead of the techniques passed down by their ancestors. What will be left of us in a generation? What good are songs and traditions if there is no one left alive to remember them? Tyler shot back. The old ways could not save us from the metal hunters. Only by learning and adapting did we survive. The argument might have continued indefinitely, but it was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected messenger. A lone hunter stumbled into the sanctuary, half frozen and bearing news that changed everything. Ships, the messenger gasped between breaths. Ships from the sky landing the eastern valleys. Not metal hunters, something else. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Could it be? After more than a year of believing himself the sole survivor of his expedition, was it possible that rescue had finally come? The expedition to investigate the landing site was carefully planned and heavily armed. If these were indeed human ships, they could represent salvation or disaster, depending on who had sent them and why. What they found was a scene that filled Marcus with conflicting emotions. 3 human transport ships had landed in a valley about 50 miles from the sanctuary, and a temporary base was being established. The ships bore the insignia of the Colonial Survey Corps, the same organization that had sent Marcus and his team to this world in the first place. But something was wrong. Instead of the careful, methodical approach that characterized legitimate survey operations, this base had the look of a military installation. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, and the equipment being unloaded included weapons and restraint devices. Slave hunters, Linda whispered, reading the situation with the instincts of someone whose people had faced such threats before. They come to take my people as property. Marcus studied the base through improvised binoculars, his heart sinking as he recognized some of the equipment: neural restraints, processing units, transport cages, all the tools needed to capture and ship intelligent beings as forced labor. The terrible irony was not lost on him. After spending more than a year learning to see Linda's people as equals, as friends and allies, he was now faced with members of his own species who saw them only as potential commodities. We have to warn the clans, he said, lowering the binoculars. If these people succeed in establishing A permanent base. They'll start raiding settlements throughout the region. But warning the clans proved easier said than done. Many of the traditionalists saw the arrival of more humans as vindication of their fears about alien contamination. If this was what human knowledge led to, they argued perhaps it would have been better to resist change from the beginning. You see, Brooks declared during another contentious council meeting, we welcomed one sky demon and now more come to enslave us all. This is the reward for abandoning our pure ways. These are not the same humans, Tyler argued. Marcus has shown us honor and respect. These newcomers show only greed and violence. How can we tell the difference? Brooks shot back. They all have the same pale skin, the same strange words. For all we know, this one has been preparing the way for his masters all along. The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. After everything they had been through together, after all the bonds of trust and friendship they had built, to be suspected of treachery was almost unbearable. But Linda's response was swift and decisive. Marcus has bled with us, fought beside us, saved our lives, and protected our people. Anyone who questions his loyalty questions my judgment as well. The debate was settled when scouts reported that the slave hunters had begun conducting raids on outlying settlements. The evidence of their intentions was undeniable. Several families had already been captured and transported to the base for processing. Faced with this external threat, the clans had little choice but to unite once again. But the question remained, how could a primitive society armed with spears and blades hope to defeat enemies equipped with advanced technology and military training the same way we defeated the metal hunters? Linda said during their strategy session, we use our advantages, knowledge of the terrain, superior numbers, and tactics they won't expect. But Marcus shook his head. These aren't alien invaders who don't understand this world. These are humans trained for this kind of operation. They'll have protocols for dealing with primitive resistance, countermeasures for guerrilla tactics. Then what do you suggest? Tyler asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities and their likely consequences. Finally he looked up with an expression that was equal parts determination and regret. I go to them, he said, alone as a survivor of the original expedition. And GT clears throat. And GT, that's suicide, Linda protested. They'll either kill you or force you to help them hunt my people. Not necessarily, Marcus replied. I'm a valuable asset, the only human who survived on this world for an extended period. They'll want to debrief me, learn what I know about local conditions and native capabilities. He paused. That gives me an opportunity to feed them false information, to mislead their planning. And when they discover your deception, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But in the meantime, I might be able to sabotage their operation from the inside. The plan was risky beyond measure, but with no other viable options, the clan leaders reluctantly agreed. Marcus would present himself as a desperate survivor, grateful for rescue, while secretly working to undermine the slave operation from within. Linda insisted on accompanying him partway to the base, despite the obvious dangers. If something goes wrong, she said, I want to be close enough to help If something goes wrong, you need to be far enough away to survive it, Marcus replied. But he didn't try to dissuade her completely. After everything they had been through together, he understood her need to be involved. The approach to the human base was conducted with extreme caution. Marcus had Linda help him practice his cover story that he had been living as a hermit in the deep caves, avoiding contact with the natives, barely surviving on whatever food he could scavenge. Remember, Linda coached him as they watched the base from a concealed position. You must seem grateful but not too eager, suspicious of the natives but not too knowledgeable about our capabilities. I know, Marcus said, checking his appearance one final time. He had deliberately let his hair and beard grow wild, and his clothes were stained and patched to support his story of hardship, survival. And Marcus, Linda added, her phosphorescent eyes serious in the darkness, if you cannot return to us, know that what we have built together will survive. The knowledge shared, the friendship between our peoples, these things are stronger than any individual. He wanted to tell her that he would return, that their plan would work, and they would be together again soon. But Snort's honesty had always been the foundation of their relationship, and he would not compromise that now. Take care of Tyler and the others, he said instead. They'll need your wisdom to guide them. The walk to the base perimeter was the longest of Marcus's life. With every step he moved further away from the people who had become his family, and closer to those who saw them as property to be harvested. The guards who intercepted him were professional and suspicious, exactly what he had expected. They searched him thoroughly, confiscated his crude iron blade, and subjected him to a barrage of questions about his identity and survival. Marcus Chen, geological survey specialist, he told them, giving him real name and background. I've been hiding in the cave system since the crash, avoiding contact with the hostiles. The sergeant in charge of the patrol looked skeptical. Our intelligence suggests the natives are primitive, barely above Stone Age technology. Primitive doesn't mean harmless, Marcus replied, falling easily into the role of a traumatized survivor. They killed my entire team within days of our landing. I've been running from them ever since, so they knew on them. The story was plausible enough to get him inside the base perimeter, where he was handed over to intelligence officers for more detailed questioning. These were harder men, trained to spot deception and manipulation. But Marcus had spent over a year learning to think like a survivor, to adapt his responses to whatever situation he faced. He gave them just enough truth to be believable while carefully omitting anything that might help their slaving operation. The natives are organized into clan groups, he reported during one debriefing session, highly territorial, constantly fighting among themselves. Their weapons are crude but effective in close combat, all true but missing crucial details about recent alliance building and tactical innovations. Population estimates, the intelligence officer asked. Hard to say. I avoided contact whenever possible, maybe a few thousand scattered across the continent. In reality, he knew the number was closer to 100,000, but letting them underestimate their potential opposition seemed wise. Technological capabilities: Stone Age with some basic metallurgy no understanding of advanced physics or engineering. Again, technically true but misleading. About recent developments, the intelligence officer seemed satisfied with his reports, but Marcus knew he was walking a tightrope. Too much cooperation and he would be complicit in enslaving Linda's people. Too little and he would be exposed as a security risk. His opportunity for sabotage came when they assigned him to advisory role in planning the next round of raids. His supposed knowledge of native behavior and terrain made him valuable for selecting targets and predicting resistance. These settlements, he said, pointing to locations on their tactical map that he knew had already been abandoned. Isolated, lightly defended, good access for extraction vehicles. The raiding parties that hit those locations found nothing but empty buildings and cold fire pits. The intelligence officer in charge, frustrated but not yet suspicious. Your information was outdated, he told Marcus. The hostiles must have better communication than we thought, or they're more nomadic than I realized. Marcus suggested, I told you. I avoided contact when possible, but each failed raid made the slavers more cautious and more thorough in their planning. Marcus realized that his window for effective sabotage was closing rapidly. The crisis came when intelligence intercepted communications indicating a large gathering of natives in the sanctuary area. The slavers saw this as an unprecedented opportunity to capture hundreds of specimens in a single operation. We'll need local guides, the mission commander announced during the planning briefing. Someone who knows the terrain and can predict native tactical responses. All eyes turned to Marcus, and he felt the weight of impossible choices. Refused to cooperate, and his cover would be blown, ending any chance of further sabotage. Agree to help, and he would be directly responsible for leading an attack on the people he had come to love. I'll need to scout the area first, he said, buying time to think. Get current intelligence on native positions and defenses, of course. We'll provide you with an escort and full surveillance support. The escort turned out to be a squad of combat specialists led by a hard-eyed sergeant named Davis. They were professionals who had conducted dozens of similar operations on other worlds, and they watched Marcus with the casual alertness of predators evaluating potential prey. Something you should know, Sergeant, Davis said as their transport approached the sanctuary area. This is a big operation. Command wants maximum captures with minimum casualties. On our side, they don't care how many hostiles get killed in the process. Understood, Marcus replied, his heart sinking. The slavers weren't planning a surgical strike. They were preparing for a massacre. As they established their observation post overlooking the sanctuary, Marcus realized that his worst fears were being realized. The slavers had brought enough firepower to level the entire settlement, and their tactics called for overwhelming force to crush any resistance before it could organize. Thermal imaging shows approximately 400 warm bodies in the cave complex, the intelligence specialist reported, mostly clustered in the main chambers, with some scattered throughout the secondary tunnels. Perfect, the mission commander replied. We'll use gas canisters to flush them into the main chambers, then deploy restraint fields. Should be able to process the entire population in under an hour. Marcus felt sick. He had hoped to find some way to warn the sanctuary, to give them time to evacuate or prepare defenses, but the slavers' surveillance was too thorough, their security too tight. Any attempt to signal would be detected immediately. Unless there's something you should know about the cave system, he said during the final planning session. It's thermally active, unstable in some areas if you use too much explosive force. Are you suggesting the caves could collapse? The commander asked. It's possible. I've seen minor tremors cause significant structural damage in similar formations. All true, though he was deliberately exaggerating the risk. Then we'll adjust our approach. Minimal clears throat, explosive ordnance, more reliance on gas and restraint fields. It wasn't much, but it might give the defenders a slightly better chance of survival. Marcus could only hope that Tyler and the others had been preparing for this possibility. The attack was scheduled for dawn, when the natives would presumably be least alert. As Marcus lay in his assigned position, overlooking the sanctuary, he found himself thinking about all the people he was about to betray. Tyler with his eager questions about human engineering, Linda with her wisdom and courage, even old Kessara with her grudging acceptance of change. He had come to this world as a scientist seeking knowledge about geology and mineral resources. Instead, he had found something far more valuable, a sense of belonging, of purpose larger than himself. Now he was about to lose it all, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to prevent it. The first sign that something was wrong came just before dawn, when the thermal imaging detected massive movement within the cave system. Instead of the expected 400 heat signatures, the scanners were now showing thousands. What the hell? The intelligence specialist muttered frantically, adjusting his equipment. This can't be right. But it was right. Throughout the night, while the slavers had been watching the main entrance, warriors from dozens of clans had been entering the sanctuary through hidden passages that connected to the deep thermal caves. Instead of trapping a population of refugees, the slavers found themselves facing the largest gathering of native warriors in living memory. Sir, Sergeant Davis reported, his voice tight with tension, we're looking at a complete intelligence failure. This isn't a population center, it's a military staging area. The mission commander studied the tactical displays with growing alarm. How many? Minimum 3,000, possibly more, and they're not just hiding in the caves. They're moving into attack positions. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Lyndon Tyler had clearly anticipated this possibility and prepared accordingly, but courage and numbers wouldn't be enough against the slavers' advanced weapons and armor. We abort, the decided, pull back to minimum safe distance and call for orbital support. Sir, the intelligence specialist interrupted, we're detecting massive thermal buildup in the cave system. The natives appear to be doing something too. The thermal vents. On the tactical display, they watched in fascination and horror as controlled explosions began redirecting the underground thermal flows. Instead of warming the caves, the superheated water and steam was being channeled into a network of pressure vessels carved from solid rock. It's a thermal cannon, Marcus realized, understanding flooding through him. They're using the planet's own geology As a weapon, the first blast of superheated steam erupted from a concealed vent just 50 yards from the slaver's position. The temperature spike was enough to melt metal and char anything organic in its path. Fall back. All units fall back. The commander shouted into his communicator, but it was too late. More thermal vents were opening all around. Their position turning the battlefield into a hellscape of scalding steam and molten rock. In the chaos that followed, Marcus found himself separated from his escort and faced with a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could try to reach the slavers' evacuation zone and maintain his cover, or he could make his way to the sanctuary and stand with the people who had become his true family. The choice was easier than he had expected. Marcus began moving toward the sanctuary, using his knowledge of the terrain to avoid the worst of the thermal eruptions. Behind him, he could hear the slavers' transport ships lifting off, abandoning their ground forces to whatever fate awaited them. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded military history. Human technology met geological fury in a conflict that transformed the landscape itself. The thermal weapons created clouds of steam that reduced visibility to zero, while the heat turned the air itself into a weapon that could kill with every breath. But the native warriors had prepared for these conditions. They wore masks and protective gear woven from materials that could withstand the heat, and they moved through the steam clouds with the confidence of people fighting on their home ground. Marcus stumbled through the chaos, following the sound of Linda's voice as she coordinated the defense. When he finally reached her position, she looked at him with a mixture of relief and suspicion. "You came back," she said simply. "Where else would I go?" He replied, accepting the makeshift breathing mask Tyler thrust into his hands. "The slavers, what do they plan?" "Orbital bombardment, probably. They'll try to level the entire area rather than risk more ground forces." Linda nodded grimly. "Then we must finish this quickly." The final phase of the battle was a race against time. While Tyler led assault teams to hunt down the remaining slaver ground forces, Linda and Marcus worked to extend the thermal weapon network to cover as much area as possible. If the slavers were going to bombard them from orbit, they would at least make it costly. The orbital strike came just as the last of the ground-based slavers were being overwhelmed. But instead of the concentrated devastation the attack ships expected to deliver, they found their targeting disrupted by massive thermal updrafts and steam clouds that obscured the entire battlefield. Several of their precision strikes went wide, hitting empty hillsides instead of populated areas. Others were absorbed by the thermal plumes themselves. Their energy dissipated harmlessly into the planet's atmosphere. Target acquisition impossible. Marcus heard one of the orbiting ships report on a frequency he had programmed into his improvised radio. "Recommend immediate withdrawal pending reassessment." As the slaver ships departed, leaving behind their dead and abandoned equipment, the warriors of the sanctuary emerged from their caves to survey the battlefield. The thermal weapons had transformed the landscape into something alien, even by this world's standards. A maze of steaming craters and glass-smooth rock formations that would serve as a permanent monument to the day the clans united to defend their Freedom, it is over, Linda said, her voice echoing strangely in the hot, humid air. They will not return soon. But they will return eventually, Tyler added, his young face serious despite their victory. This was just the first wave. There will be others, Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. Word of this world's intelligent native population and exploitable resources would spread through human space. Other slaving operations would come, along with mining corporations, colonial administrators, and all the machinery of human expansion. Then we prepare, he said simply. We learn, we adapt, we become stronger. And we make sure that when they come again, they find us ready. In the months that followed, the alliance between human knowledge and native wisdom grew stronger than ever before. The captured slaver equipment was reverse engineered and adapted to local needs, while new thermal weapons were constructed throughout the clan territories. More importantly, the shared victory had created bonds between the clans that transcended old territorial disputes and cultural differences. For the first time in their recorded history, Linda's people began to think of themselves as a single nation rather than dozens of separate tribes. Marcus found his role evolving once again, from survivor to refugee to ally to something that had no name in either human or native language. He was a bridge between worlds, a translator of ideas and technologies, a living symbol that cooperation was possible even between the most different of peoples. Do you ever regret it? Linda asked him one evening as they stood on the observation platform they had built, overlooking the sanctuary. Below them, the lights of the expanded settlement twinkled like terrestrial stars, while above them the alien aurora painted the sky in shades of blue and green. Regret what? Choosing us over your own people. There will be consequences when word of this reaches your government. You will be branded a traitor, an enemy of humanity. Marcus considered her words seriously. It was true that his actions would be seen as betrayal by human authorities. He had not only failed to assist a legitimate slaving operation, but had actively helped the targets resist capture. I chose the people who treated me as family over those who saw me as a tool, he said finally. I chose those who offered friendship over those who demanded servitude. If that makes me a traitor to humanity, then maybe humanity needs more traitors. Linda smiled, her phosphorescent features beautiful in the starlight. My grandfather would have liked you. He always said that true loyalty is not to blood or species, but to the principles that make life worth living. As they stood together watching the alien stars emerge in the darkening sky, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought him to this moment. He had lost his old life, his old identity, his old certainties about right and wrong, but in return he had gained something precious beyond measure. Sense of purpose, a community that valued him not for what he was, but for who he chose to become. The future would bring new challenges, new conflicts, new opportunities for both triumph and tragedy. But whatever came, Marcus knew he would face it with friends beside him and principles to guide him. He was home.